Her blood wrote the history her enemies tried to erase. She was born in the cold shadow of fate, beneath the frost-kissed skies of December 1542, when Scotland bled between the teeth of ambition and faith. The air itself felt heavy with prophecy as a cry echoed through Linlithgow Palace, the cry of an infant queen. Mary Stuart entered the world not as a child of laughter and lullabies, but as the final breath of a dying dynasty. Her father, King James V of Scotland, lay pale and defeated at Falkland Palace, his heart broken by war and betrayal. He had just suffered a humiliating loss to the English at Solway Moss, and his kingdom, already fractured by greed and religion, teetered on the edge of chaos. When word reached him that his wife, Marie of Guise, had borne a daughter instead of the hoped-for male heir, his face twisted with despair. "It came with a lass, and it will go with a lass," he murmured, a line carved by destiny into Scotland's very soul. Within 7 days, he was dead, and his newborn daughter inherited a throne drenched in sorrow. The infant queen, not even a week old, became the center of a kingdom that did not know how to love her. Scotland's nobles were wolves, each hungering for control, each hiding daggers behind smiles. The regency was claimed by James Hamilton, the Earl of Arran, but his loyalty shifted like mist. Across the border, the English king, Henry VIII, watched the turmoil with predatory eyes. He dreamed of uniting England and Scotland under one rule, his, and demanded Mary's hand for his son, Prince Edward. It would have been peace by marriage, empire through innocence. But Scotland refused. Pride and religion intervened, and the rejection ignited Henry's fury. He unleashed upon Scotland a brutal campaign that history would remember as the rough wooing. Villages were burned to the ground. Churches turned to ash. Women and children were slaughtered as English armies eluded the child queen with fire and blood. It was war disguised as courtship, and it made Mary, even as a child. Scotland trembled again under the weight of royal passion. And soon, that passion curdled into poison. Darnley was charming in court, but cruel in private. His pride burned like wildfire. He wanted not just to be Mary's husband, but her equal, her king. When Mary refused to grant him the crown matrimonial, a title that would make him co-sovereign, his adoration twisted into resentment. He drank heavily, consorted with scheming lords, and grew jealous of anyone who spoke kindly to the Queen. Among those was David Rizzio, Mary's Italian secretary, a man of wit and music, her confidant, and in the eyes of her enemies, her supposed lover. The whispers spread like plague, that Rizzio was too close, too powerful, too intimate. And in those whispers, Darnley found the excuse he needed to drown his insecurities in blood. On the night of March 9, 1566, Mary was dining in her private chamber at Holyrood, surrounded by her closest ladies and Rizzio. She was 6 months pregnant with the future King James VI, her only child, when suddenly the doors burst open. Darnley stood there, pale and trembling, his eyes empty, behind him a group of armed conspirators. The Queen rose, confused and terrified, as her husband seized her by the arm. "Forgive me, madam," he said, his voice shaking, "but this man must die." Before she could speak, the conspirators dragged Rizzio from the table. His cries echoed down the corridor as they stabbed him again and again, 56 times, before Mary's horrified eyes. His blood soaked the floorboards beneath her. Some say the stains never vanished, not even after centuries. At 15, she was married to Francis, the Dauphin of France, in a ceremony that glittered with gold and danger. The cathedral bells sang across Paris, and the crowds roared for the beauty of the young couple, two crowns bound by youth and illusion. The bride, radiant in white and pearls, smiled beside her shy husband. Mary was now Queen of Scots and Queen of France by alliance, the most powerful woman in Europe, at least on parchment. But as the candles burned low and the celebrations ended, a whisper of doom lingered. Francis was frail, sickly, timid, a boy king whose crown weighed too heavy. Mary loved him gently, not passionately, perhaps because she pitied him more than she adored him. Yet she played her role flawlessly, dazzling courtiers with wit, poetry, and a charm that made even her enemies pause. But fate, cruel as ever, was waiting. Barely 2 years into their marriage, King Henry II of France was killed in a jousting accident, a splintered lance piercing his iron skull, leaving Mary's husband as King Francis II. The crown that glittered so brightly now rested upon two trembling heads. Mary, not yet 17, became Queen of France beside a boy dying by inches. Francis was too weak to rule, and power fell into the hands of his mother, the formidable Catherine de' Medici, a woman who regarded Mary with suspicion and envy. In the shadowed corridors of the Louvre, whispers followed Mary's every step. Her beauty was both her gift and her curse. She was too perfect, too foreign, too powerful. Her presence alone threatened the ambitions of others. In 1560, as Francis's health crumbled, the air in the palace turned cold. Mary prayed beside his bedside, her fingers clutching his pale hand, her tears silent yet endless. When he finally died that December, her world shattered once again. At 18, she was a widow, stripped of title, power, and place. The French court that once adored her now saw her as a ghost of politics, a young queen without a throne, a widow too dangerous to keep. Catherine de' Medici, fearing her influence, urged her to return to Scotland. France was no longer her home. The crown of France slipped from her head, leaving only the heavier, lonelier one of Scotland. So Mary returned, to a homeland she had left as a child, to a kingdom she barely remembered. Her ship, the La Renard, sailed from Calais under grey skies. The sea was rough, as though warning her of what awaited. When she reached the coast of Leith on August 19, 1561, the mist hung low over the land like a shroud. She stepped onto Scottish soil dressed in black, mourning for her husband, her youth, her lost innocence. As she looked upon the stone streets of Edinburgh, the air smelled of smoke and rain, not perfume, and roses as in France. The people watched her with curiosity, suspicion, even resentment. They saw in her the foreign queen, the Catholic monarch in a Protestant realm, the embodiment of everything that divided them. The bells tolled not in celebration, but in caution. Mary's heart, however, still carried hope. She believed she could heal her divided kingdom through compassion and diplomacy. She held audiences with nobles, spoke gently to her subjects, and even charmed her fiercest critics with grace and intellect. Her charisma was magnetic. When she entered a room, even her enemies felt compelled to bow. But beneath her elegance burned fire. She was not merely a queen. She was a woman who had suffered loss and was determined to rule in her own right. Yet Scotland was not the court of France. Its stones were colder, its people prouder, and its politics bloodier. Every smile hid a plot, every oath a betrayal. She was 20, beautiful, intelligent, and utterly alone. Her half-brother, James Stuart, the Earl of Moray, acted as her advisor but harboured his own ambitions. John Knox, the fiery Protestant preacher, thundered against her from the pulpit, calling her a Jezebel and warning that a woman's rule is contrary to God's law. Her every move was watched, judged, condemned. She could not even pray without whispers echoing through the chambers of Holyrood Palace. And yet, she endured. She hosted banquets and hunts, smiled at her enemies, and rode through storms with the courage of a soldier. She wrote poetry, her verses soft but haunting, filled with longing for peace and freedom. She found solace in music, in falconry, in the quiet rustle of letters sent secretly across borders. In her heart still glimmered a distant dream of uniting Scotland and England through her claim to both crowns. For Mary Stuart was not only Queen of Scots by birth, she was also the legitimate heir to the English throne, the granddaughter of Henry VIII's sister. Across the border, her cousin Elizabeth I ruled England, brilliant, cautious, unmarried, and wary. Two queens bound by blood yet divided by religion, ambition, and fate. The world would soon come to know that only one could survive, but for now, in the dimly lit halls of Holyrood, Mary smiled her queenly smile and let the courtiers believe she was at peace. Outside, the wind howled across the grey moors like an omen. Inside, beneath her silks and jewels, her heart trembled with both hope and fear, the kind only destiny can inspire. She did not yet know that every friend she trusted would one day betray her, that every love she embraced would lead her closer to the scaffold. She did not know that history would one day remember her not as a ruler, but as a symbol of beauty destroyed by power, of faith broken by politics, of love swallowed by fate. And as night fell over Edinburgh, the young queen stood at her window, watching the last light fade over the hills. The wind carried with it the faint echoes of her father's prophecy. It came with a lass, and it will go with a lass. Mary's crown gleamed faintly in the dark, as though warning her that it was not a gift, it was a curse, born of blood and bound to end in it. The return of Mary Stuart to Scotland had stirred more ghosts than it had peace. Her crown gleamed, her voice carried grace, and her smile could calm storms, but beneath that beauty lay a battlefield of daggers, sharpened in whispers and prayers. Her reign began not in celebration but in suspicion. The courtiers of Edinburgh bowed before her, but their hearts bent elsewhere, toward ambition, religion, and the English gold that poured through secret hands. Mary had inherited not just a throne, but a wound, a kingdom cut in half between Catholics and Protestants, loyalty and rebellion, love and hatred. The Queen believed she could heal it, that her elegance and fairness could tame the wild politics of her land. But Scotland was no longer a country of dreams. It was a chessboard carved from stone and blood. And she, radiant and hopeful, had returned as the most beautiful piece, the Queen destined to fall. In those first months, she worked tirelessly to earn her people's trust. She rode through the rain to meet villagers, listened to farmers' troubles, dined with nobles who plotted behind their cups. Her laughter rang through Holyrood Palace like sunlight through storm clouds, and for a moment, the people adored her. But her greatest strength, her heart, would soon become her undoing. For in that heart, lonely and wounded, there was room for love, and love in a queen's life is a dangerous thing. At first, her thoughts were drawn toward reconciliation with her cousin across the border, Queen Elizabeth I of England. Mary sent letters to her, written with grace and sincerity, addressing her as my dearest sister and cousin. In those lines, she pleaded for recognition as Elizabeth's heir, for the peace that might come if both crowns were bound by trust rather than fear. But Elizabeth was no fool. She knew Mary's claim to the English throne was strong, too strong. The English Catholics already whispered that Elizabeth was illegitimate, born of a forbidden union. To them, Mary, the Catholic Queen of Scots, was the rightful monarch of England. So Elizabeth, smiling behind her lace fan, answered Mary's letters with politeness but delay. She kept her cousin close with flattery and promises, close enough to watch, but never close enough to help. While England's queen played her silent game, Mary turned her gaze inward, to the nobles who surrounded her court like moths to a flame. Among them was a man whose presence would change her destiny forever, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. He was tall, handsome, and young, with eyes that mirrored vanity and ambition more than love. Yet when Mary saw him, she saw something familiar. He was half Scottish, half English, and carried royal blood that matched her own. Their union, she believed, could strengthen her claim to England's throne and secure Scotland's loyalty. To her counsel's horror, she fell deeply, recklessly in love. Their marriage in July 1565 was a spectacle of gold and defiance. The bells of Edinburgh tolled, but the joy that filled the streets was thin and brittle. The Protestant nobles hissed in anger. Elizabeth fumed in silence, for Darnley was her subject and his marriage to Mary had been done without her consent. Scotland trembled again under the weight of royal passion. And soon, that passion curdled into poison. Darnley was charming in court, but cruel in private. His pride burned like wildfire. He wanted not just to be Mary's husband, but her equal, her king. When Mary refused to grant him the crown matrimonial, a title that would make him co-sovereign, his adoration twisted into resentment. He drank heavily, consorted with scheming lords, and grew jealous of anyone who spoke kindly to the Queen. Among those was David Rizzio, Mary's Italian secretary, a man of wit and music, her confidant, and in the eyes of her enemies, her supposed lover. The whispers spread like plague, that Rizzio was too close, too powerful, too intimate. And in those whispers, Darnley found the excuse he needed to drown his insecurities in blood. On the night of March 9, 1566, Mary was dining in her private chamber at Holyrood, surrounded by her closest ladies and Rizzio. She was 6 months pregnant with the future King James VI, her only child, when suddenly the doors burst open. Darnley stood there, pale and trembling, his eyes empty, behind him a group of armed conspirators. The Queen rose, confused and terrified, as her husband seized her by the arm. "Forgive me, madam," he said, his voice shaking, "but this man must die." Before she could speak, the conspirators dragged Rizzio from the table. His cries echoed down the corridor as they stabbed him again and again, 56 times, before Mary's horrified eyes. His blood soaked the floorboards beneath her. Some say the stains never vanished, not even after centuries. Mary's heart broke that night, but her spirit did not. She was a queen, and she would not fall to the madness of men. Days later, she confronted Darnley with icy calm, her grief turned to resolve. She pretended forgiveness, knowing revenge would serve her better. She persuaded him to flee with her from the conspirators who had used him as a pawn. Together, they escaped Holyrood under the cover of darkness, riding through rain and fear until they reached Dunbar Castle. There, the hunted queen became the hunter. She gathered her loyal forces, crushed the rebels who had defiled her home, and returned to Edinburgh victorious. Yet victory could not mend what love had destroyed. Darnley, ashamed and paranoid, grew sickly in both body and mind. His arrogance had isolated him, and even Mary began to see him not as a partner, but as a danger. Still, she visited him in his illness, her heart torn between duty and disgust. In February 1567, she arranged for him to recover at a small house called Kirko Field, near Edinburgh, a place meant to keep him safe, or so she said. On the night of February 10th, the city slept beneath a full moon. At midnight, an explosion shattered the silence. The house where Darnley lay was blown to pieces. His body was found in a nearby orchard, unmarked by fire but strangled, as though the blast had been a cover for murder. The shock rippled through Scotland like thunder. The Queen's husband was dead, and suspicion fell upon the Queen herself. Some whispered she had planned it, others said she had merely turned a blind eye. But one name kept returning in every whisper: James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell. He was bold, powerful, and loyal to Mary, or so she believed. The world would soon see that he was loyal only to his own ambition. Bothwell had been among Mary's most trusted allies, a man who had defended her crown during rebellion and war. Yet in the weeks after Darnley's death, he rose too quickly, too confidently. He was tried for the murder but acquitted, not because he was innocent, but because no one dared challenge him. The Queen, weary and isolated, found in him a dangerous comfort. The court gasped when, only 3 months after Darnley's death, Mary married Bothwell. The marriage shocked even her supporters. To her enemies, it was proof of guilt. To her people, it was betrayal. The church denounced her, the nobles turned against her, and her cousin Elizabeth watched with silent satisfaction as Scotland devoured its queen. But love, or perhaps desperation, blinded Mary to the storm gathering around her. She believed Bothwell could protect her from rebellion. Instead, he became her ruin. The nobles rose in armed revolt, declaring her marriage an abomination and her rule illegitimate. At Carberry Hill, Mary rode out to face them, dressed in black velvet, her crown glinting faintly in the grey light. 4 hours, she argued, pleaded, commanded, but her forces wavered. Bothwell fled into exile, abandoning her to her fate. The once celebrated queen was taken prisoner by her own subjects. They stripped her of her jewels, tore her banners from the castle walls, and locked her in the bleak fortress of Loch Leven. There, behind cold stone walls and echoing corridors, the woman who had once ruled 2 kingdoms was reduced to a captive. Her body weakened, her spirit wavered, and in her despair, she miscarried twins, the last of her unborn hope. Her captors forced her to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI. The pen shook in her hand as she signed away her crown, her tears falling onto the parchment. The child she had carried through storms and betrayal was now a king, and she was nothing but his ghost. And as her ship vanished into the English mist, the Queen did not know. She was sailing not toward safety, but toward her own doom. Stay tuned for Part 2, The Prisoner and the Execution.